Thank you for that introduction. Real quick, I know everybody's been sitting here for a little while. Can I get a show of hands of how many people are representing or own small business or emerging small business in the biotech space? Okay, and how many have already received some level of non-dilutive funding? Okay, is that all in the realm of grants or SBIR, STTR? Any programs that are larger, that are contractually based? A smattering, okay. That's primarily what I'm going to talk about today, is access to funding and programs that fall a little bit further down the technology maturity continuum. So one last show of hands, has anybody heard of ATI? A couple, okay, that's good. Well, we'll go over it. I only have 75 slides. We should be done in about an hour and 20 minutes. I'm Mike Stebbins. I work for ATI. I've been with the company for 18 years. And while we span multiple technology domains, what I'll principally talk about this morning is the medical and health security portfolio that I lead. But I would like to give you a little bit of introduction into what ATI does to set the landscape for the role we play in connecting you all, industry, small, emerging companies, large businesses, nonprofits, academia, and your technologies with the government funding and needs to accomplish their portfolios on an annual basis. I'm not going to belabor ATI. We have been around since 1988. Our sole objective as a nonprofit is to lessen the burdens of government. So we bring industry, and I'll use that term broadly today, writ large, the small, large, nonprofit academia, to really solve some of the nation's most complex problems. We're over 350 employees now. We have well over 6,300 different entities, industry entities that comprise our consortia to help meet those government needs. They are represented in all 50 states and across almost 25 foreign entities. This is really what we do. We build and lead technology development collaborations. We are not technologists ourselves, though some of us do have science or engineering degrees. We are the facilitator between government funding, government needs, and the technology that resides with you all. So we operate these consortia. And all they are in almost all cases, they are virtual gatherings of entities. So in one case, we actually have a consortium, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, that is in and of itself a 501c3 nonprofit. The government requested it to be that way. But most of our consortia, we have put together at the government's request around a particular technology area, and they're just loosely organized with a consortium management agreement or some other agreement. Very low, if any, financial obligation for members to join, and there's no desire to create a country club within that consortium. We're just looking for entities that have expertise in that area. The benefit of being a member of a consortia is, in some cases, that's a mechanism that the government is using to understand the industrial base associated with their specific area. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. You, as members, have expanded access, understanding the government's acquisition forecasting. You have good information exchange between us and you all, between yourselves that have common interests in the industry. Perhaps there are opportunities for you to engage and team together. And then ultimately, we're talking about money flow and getting things on contract, and the process by which we work with the government is a bit more expeditious than typical contracting. So this is a heat map. I hope this is going to work. If it doesn't, then I'll explain it. This is where we were 15 years ago in terms of collaborations across industry. And I'm not going to, let's see if this will play. No, it didn't. Okay, we have collaborations in all 50 states. So some of the metrics I already talked about. You see the business demographics. The vast majority of our members are small businesses, and the vast majority of the contracts that go out through this mechanism go out to small businesses. And there's some legislation that helps that happen, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So the play was going to watch the map fill up with greater colors of blue. Okay. So this is where ATI sits. We sit firmly in the middle between government, their interests, their ability to do things quickly and at scale, and industry that's moving at a very different time frame, both as a company. Deal flow is important, cash flow is important, technology advances much quicker than the government moves in terms of developing their budget cycles and their acquisition pathways. So we sit there in the middle to be that honest broker between industry and government. And the funds that flow through the government to us, to consortium members, is not diluted by the fee, the very small fee that we would charge the government. So if your company were to win a $1 million award or a $10 million award, that money is yours to run that program. It's not, there's no tax taken off of that. This is a very simplified version of the process. And again, I'm talking, this is how it works across almost all of ATI's programs. You have on the far left side a program office within the government. Sometimes it's a very formal program office. Sometimes it's one or two individuals. They are coming up with requirements. The idea of a consortium is you can run those requirements before they become actual solicitations, if the government is willing, into industry to get input through requests for information, through industry days, other means like that. Industry can then impart their wisdom, their knowledge of state of art and state of capability back to the government, and that often results in a reshaping of that requirement. So when it does come out in a formal solicitation to industry members, then the government has a better sense that the responses that will come back are responsive. We then release that solicitation out to industry. There can be additional collaboration. Often there are industry days post-solicitation release where the government will talk about some of the particulars that are written in the solicitation. We've all read hundreds and hundreds of solicitations, and we've all responded in hundreds and hundreds of proposals, and the writing is not always good. It's difficult to write a solid solicitation and get out everything that you want industry to respond to in written word. So these industry days are really critical. In fact, we've seen examples where industry days have resulted in a pause in a solicitation, a rewrite, and then it comes back out. But that interaction between government and industry is so critical. Ultimately, you have a firm like ours that can walk you through all the processes. We're not going to write your proposal for you. We're not going to help you write your proposal, because if we do that for one, we might have to do it for 6,300 other consortium members. But we'll walk you through the process. For each consortium and government customer, it's the same. So if BARDA is introducing a solicitation through their rapid response partnership vehicle, every time they issue a solicitation, it's going to require the same type of formatting in your response. We walk you through that. We walk you through the cost implications, et cetera. And then industry submits their proposals, and then government goes and does their job fully. Government does all source selection. we become aware of the results. Those get relayed back to industry, and then awards start to happen. And we walk through the post-award process with you, sometimes in a technical standpoint, but always in an administrative standpoint. So the resulting award ultimately is between your company and our company at the direction of the government. We do that for 1,500 projects a year at a scale that helps the government make sure that they have their folks from a technical standpoint looking over the project and doing that type of work. We help with milestone tracking, status reports. Every month when you have cost incurred, you invoice ATI. We then pay you net 30 to ensure that cash flow is happening. And then when the projects close out, we walk you through that process too. I told you we are in a lot of technology domains, and then I'm going to move on to why we're all here. But if you look at how we've organized this map, armaments, aviation, infrastructure, biotech, IT, maritime, all of those logos are consortia that ATI operates. All of the ones that I'm going to talk about are in the lower right corner there. But we're really in quite a few different areas. So those are the ones that I'll talk about today. We'll get to those in a moment. Actually, we'll get to those now. So I know this isn't an eye chart, and I apologize. We were introduced with all 5 of these. The ones on the far on the left, MCDC, Medical CBRN Defense Consortium, CWMD, Counter-WMD Consortium, and MTEC, the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, are all run out of the Department of Defense. The first 2 are run out of the JPEO, the Joint Program Executive Office for Chem, Bio, Rad, Nuke Defense. So it represents the majority of that office's responsibility. How do we protect our warfighter from exposure to chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats? Now, these are all examples of other transactions. So that is the contracting vehicle. It's not a grant, it's not a cooperative agreement, and it's not subject to the FAR, even though a lot of FAR clauses have crept into another transaction. They're all governed by other transactions, which really allow for a lot of the collaboration to take place. But I wanted to bring that up. It's not the only acquisition vehicle that these offices are using, nor should it be. It is simply one acquisition vehicle they have in their acquisition profile. They do have FAR grants. They do offer OTs through one-offs. They have SBIRs, STTRs. They have IDIQs, et cetera. But these are all other transaction agreements. All the awards that get made through these are other transaction agreements. So JPEO for the first 2, and then Defense Health Agency and the Medical Research and Development Command is who is funding projects through MTEC. And I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics. All of those were started in 2015, 16, and 17, so they're quite mature. You can see the members there. They range from about 300 in MCDC, 400 or so in CWMD, and a little over 700 or right at 700 for MTEC. Active projects, I think this is fairly accurate. 107 projects and then 74 active. That's the way it goes across. And then the funding ceiling. So this is the amount of funding that can flow through the vehicle during its lifetime, okay? We will talk about actual funding that has flowed through the vehicle. So you see there's a couple Bs up there. Okay, MCDC, CWMD were both set up with $10 billion ceilings. MCDC ceiling has been raised because quite a bit of Operation Warp Speed COVID projects ran through that, so they raised the ceiling to account for that. The last 3, Rapid Response Partnership Vehicle and the Biopharmaceutical Manufacturing Consortium, were just stood up less than 18 months ago through BARDA. That was an artifact of Operation Warp Speed and the pandemic. How can BARDA better position themselves to deal with the next round of pandemic. We know it's going to happen at some point. I'll talk about the differences between the two. They're both under BARDA. They both have either a $10 or a $20 billion ceiling that can go up to $100 billion during a public health emergency. So again, these are ceilings, not funding that's guaranteed. And then while we haven't run a project through ARPA-H yet, we do manage the Customer Experience Hub, which is based in Dallas, Texas at Pegasus Park, and we're on the cusp of launching a clinical trial readiness program. Okay, so bear with me, and I'll try to go quickly. We're going to walk through each of these. There is an eye chart for each of them. I'm not sure if these are going to be made available. This is all for public release. I give examples of representative projects that are running through these. That's where the eye chart comes in. I'm not going to go over those in gross detail. 2023 is when RRPV was established, September, right at the end of the fiscal year. We actually are getting ready to make the 13th award today. So far, $530 million of funding has gone on to project awards. The one we just inked today is putting another $350 million on. So some projects could be in the $1 million, single $1 million, some can be in the tens of $1 million, and some could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The key technology areas, vaccine and therapeutic R&D manufacturing. There's quite a bit of Project NextGen money still running through, though I don't think Project NextGen will continue. They'll come out with something new as Congress deems appropriate. But vaccine and therapeutic R&D and manufacturing advancements, vaccine manufacturing platforms, clinical trial and assay innovation. We have one project I'll show you here in a moment that's really quite unique. Diagnostics and medical tech devices, and of course enabling technologies. And I know those are broad categories, very broad categories, but that's primarily what's happening on RRPV. Again, here are some representative funding opportunities. I'll hit some highlights. We're going to talk about the decentralized clinical trials here in a moment. mRNA-based pandemic influenza vaccine that's actively being worked on as a project. Project NextGen on stats and COP for data coming out of clinical trials. Lots of emerging infectious disease concentration through RRPV. Here's a little bit about the decentralized clinical trial. I think this is the first example where government has gone out and sought a retail pharmacy to expand the ability to do clinical trials in a decentralized fashion. So Walgreens started up, oh gosh, I don't know, it was probably 6 or 7 months ago, I think, when that project started. So that's an interesting one. The government, and in particular BARDA, is becoming very adept at looking at project work in a very unique way, vice just let's develop an advancement on this technology. How do we better utilize the assets within industry to accomplish the goals? And I think this Walgreens project is one of those examples. In fact, when they came to us and said, hey, can you guys reach out to these retail pharmacies? They are not typical companies that would be part of our consortia. They are not out there looking for federal dollars in the R&D space usually. And so through our connection base, we went out to many of the retail pharmacies. It was a full and open competition. It was a very interesting process to watch materialize. I'm not going through BARDA versus DoD in order. The Medical CBRN Defense Consortium, as I mentioned, that's out of the JPEO. It is a joint office. Quite a bit of the funding is coming down from OSD, established back in April of 2016. Quite a bit of funding. Their thrust is really protecting the warfighter from a medical standpoint against exposure to chemical and biological threats, rad and nuke as well. So are they going to be exposed? Can we give them a prophylaxis? So imagine warfighters in Eastern Africa, Western Africa, do they need to be inoculated for Ebola, Marburg, et cetera? Once they are exposed, whether they're pre-symptomatic or post-symptomatic, do we have a therapeutic that can address their needs? And then more importantly, can we, or just as importantly, can we diagnose them so we understand what we need to give them? quite a bit of COVID-19 funding to include Operation Warp Speed efforts ran through this. We executed about $6 billion of Operation Warp Speed projects. Pfizer's first 100 million doses, Sanofi's first 100 million doses, Janssen. We did a therapeutic under Regeneron. Beyond that, about $1 billion of funding has flown through on non-Operation Warp Speed projects. Representative funding opportunities, I'm not going to belabor this. It should be available for you guys. I think I've described at a high level what's happening on MCDC. Here's a quick description of some of the work done through OWS. I'll highlight really the nation's first rapid COVID-19 test. This was a project that was already underway with Cepheid here in the Bay Area, and we were able to modify that statement of work and just switch the analyte the target analyte that they were looking for. I know 45 minutes today sounds like a long time, but back in April and May of 2020, 45 minutes was a dramatic improvement. That project ran through ATI and our consortium as well. Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, they're fairly well represented here in the Bay Area for JP Morgan. Again, established out of MRDC, that now falls up under Defense Health Agency. They've been very prolific. They just crossed the $1 billion funding mark 6 or so months ago. While they do have some infectious disease work, they're really heavy into military medicine, combat casualty care, et cetera. A lot of their work is looking at how the impact of the warfighter post-deployment. Some TBI, some PTSD, some restoration, vision, skin, et cetera. Quite a good program. Again, funding opportunities, I'll let you guys look at those offline. This was one really interesting project that started off early on with funding from MTEC and ultimately resulted in these vascular injury repair, these acellular vessels going out to Ukraine and being used literally on the front lines in field hospitals to preserve the life of warfighters, to get them to a more serious care unit where they could have a better chance of long-term survivability. Biopharmaceutical Manufacturing Preparedness Consortium. This is another one under BARDA, started about the same time as RRPV. You see some of the stats there. Now, this one's really interesting. It's not looking at solely fill finish out the door. It's looking at the entirety of the biopharm manufacturing supply chain, not just advancements in manufacturing. So we have some active projects looking at APIs, not only where you can onshore, reshore, but have that capacity now domestic, but how do you advance APIs, key starting materials, and then the entirety of the supply chain to include some of the consumables that are associated with that work. The thrust of this program is strengthening the domestic industrial base for biopharm manufacturing, so we don't run into a couple of the complications, the complications that we realized as a global society when a pandemic hits and you can't get some of those key materials from either countries that need them for themselves or maybe countries that don't want to give them to us. And so where can we improve the industrial base? So not only expansion of the supply chain, capacity expansion and reservation, and of course advancements in biomanufacturing technologies. A couple examples here. And then the last one I think on our list, counter WMD. This is sister to the MCDC. So while MCDC was looking at everything associated with medically exposure of seaborne threats to the warfighter, this is more physical. So PPE, decontamination, sensing, detecting, how do we understand a forward operating position before we put our assets out in place? How do we provide that situational awareness back to the operators, et cetera. And then finally, ARPA-H Customer Experience Hub. So for those who may not know, ARPA-H, after they stood up, they looked to create 2 hubs. One's called a Customer Experience Hub. The other is an Investment Catalyst or Investor Catalyst Hub. The way those are intended to work together is as new ideas are being developed and move through the technology maturity continuum, at some point they will no longer be eligible, or there will not be additional federal funding. So how do we ensure that they survive in the wild? So at some point, you'll have to have that crossover or that carryover from one hub to another, and starting to look for external investment, VC, private capital, et cetera, to fund those and get them out, commercialize, et cetera. The idea of the Customer Experience Hub is really very simple. It's understanding, now ARPA-H, much like the gentleman we heard this morning talking about DARPA, is looking to solve those very ugly, hairy, intractable problems. But it's not good enough simply to look at a technical problem and solve it that way. You really have to take into account who the end user is. So whether it's a community that has been historically underrepresented, or a community that has lack of trust either in the healthcare system, the federal government, or whomever, how do you understand their needs at the generation of the technical idea as well as throughout the entirety of the development? So you don't, at the end, have created this great technology, but there's no uptake by the community of interest, and now you really don't have any, you don't have anything to show for it. So the idea is to get the community involved, those areas that are most impacted by the need, having their voice heard throughout the development life cycle. Okay. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to ask questions. As I mentioned, all of these consortia have low barriers to entry. The HHS Consortium, RRPV, BioMaP, Customer Experience Hub are all free to join. The ones on the DoD side, MCDC, CWMD, happen to have a $250 a year membership fee. MTEC is just slightly higher, but not much more, maybe $500 for the smaller companies, which is represented here. I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm here throughout the day, and I thank you for your time.